They say life can change in a single moment. For me, it changed with a single email, 8 words in the subject line that ripped my world apart. We need to talk. Please check your inbox. I was sitting in a dusty construction trailer on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona, covered in sweat and sawdust when I opened that message. The summer heat was brutal, but nothing compared to the cold shock that gripped my chest when I clicked the attachment and saw it. Divorce papers. Signed. Filed. Final. No warning. No conversation. No chance to fix anything. Just a PDF file and a digital signature that made 9 years of marriage vanish like smoke in the desert air. My name is Daniel Hayes. I'm 39 years old, a project manager for a commercial construction company, and until that moment, I thought I had a solid life, a good job, a beautiful wife, a modest home we built together piece by piece. Her name was Melissa. We met in college, built dreams over late-night study sessions and dollar pizza slices. We got married young, bought our first home when everyone else was still renting apartments and chasing bar tabs. We were supposed to be the couple that made it. Or at least, that's what I believed. I stared at the email, my mind refusing to process the reality staring back at me. Melissa had filed for divorce. She had hired a lawyer. She had already moved half her savings into a private account. And I was finding out about it the same way I might find out my Amazon package had shipped, through a sterile, impersonal email with a subject line colder than any winter I'd ever known. For a long minute I just sat there, listening to the hum of the industrial fan and the faint echoes of nail guns in the distance. Everything else, the guys laughing outside, the beeping of trucks backing up, the smell of hot asphalt faded into a dull, meaningless blur. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't even hurt. I was numb. Shock has a way of wrapping itself around you like armor, keeping the pain at bay just long enough to survive the first blow. I closed the email, shut down my computer, took a long, slow breath that felt like dragging air through broken glass. I didn't throw anything. I didn't scream. I didn't call her. Instead, I stood up, wiped the sweat off my forehead with the back of my hand, and walked out into the blazing sun, feeling like a man who had just stepped into a battlefield he didn't even know he was fighting. In that moment, I made a choice. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to plead. I wasn't going to crumble into the wreckage she left behind. If Melissa thought she could destroy me with a digital signature and a coward's goodbye, she didn't know the man she had married. She didn't know the man she had betrayed. I was going to take the life she tried to shatter and turn it into something stronger, something better, something she would regret losing for the rest of her life. And it all started with one simple decision. I wasn't going to lose. Not this time. Not ever again. That night, I didn't go home. I drove aimlessly through the city streets, past neighborhoods that once felt familiar, past restaurants where we used to eat on Friday nights, past the parks where we had talked about raising kids someday. Every stoplight seemed to glow longer than usual, every car's headlights felt too bright, too harsh. Somewhere between the third and fourth loop around downtown, I finally pulled into an empty parking lot and just sat there, staring out the windshield at nothing. That's when the memories started flooding back, not the happy ones, but the ones I had buried without even realizing it. The late nights at work she never used to have. The weekends away with the girls that didn't add up. The sudden new passwords on her phone, the vague answers when I asked simple questions, the way she flinched when I touched her shoulder after a long day. I saw it all now laid out in brutal clarity. Melissa hadn't just woken up one morning and decided to leave. She had been preparing for this for months, maybe even years. And I had been too busy, too trusting, too wrapped up in building a future to notice the foundation cracking beneath my feet. There was that business trip she took to Seattle, the one she insisted was strictly professional. I remembered how she barely made eye contact when she came back, how her hugs felt mechanical, how she suddenly started talking about needing space and finding herself. I remembered thinking it was just a phase, just the normal bumps that married couples go through. I didn't push. I didn't question. I gave her room because that's what love was supposed to be: patient, understanding, forgiving. But now, sitting in that empty lot with the taste of betrayal thick in my mouth, I realized the truth. Love isn't blind trust. Love isn't silence in the face of red flags. Love isn't sacrificing your own worth just to avoid an uncomfortable conversation. Somewhere along the way, Melissa stopped seeing me as her partner and started seeing me as an obstacle. And instead of fighting for us, she found a shortcut around me right into someone else's arms. I could have stayed there all night, wallowing in anger and regret. I could have drafted a dozen furious texts I'd never send. I could have driven past the house just to see if the porch light was still on. But I didn't. Because deep down, I knew none of that would change anything. None of it would undo the email. None of it would undo the choice she had already made. Instead, I did something different. I opened the Notes app on my phone, created a new file, and titled it Rebuild. Not revenge. Not regret. Rebuild. One word. One goal. One promise to myself. I didn't know exactly how yet. I didn't have the plan fully mapped out. But I knew this: if Melissa thought she had broken me, she hadn't seen anything yet. I wasn't going to burn my life down chasing ghosts. I was going to build something so strong, so undeniable, that someday she would look back and realize she hadn't just walked away from a marriage, she had walked away from the best thing that ever happened to her. And she would have to live with that. Not me. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, my body heavy but my mind clear in a way it hadn't been in months. I sat at the kitchen table of a cheap motel room I had checked into the night before, the air stale with the smell of old coffee and cheap detergent, and made a list. I wasn't thinking about Melissa anymore. I wasn't thinking about what we lost. I was thinking about what I still had and what I needed to protect before it was too late. First, the bank accounts. I drove to the nearest branch of my bank the moment they opened, armed with a folder of every document I could scrape together. The manager, a tired man with coffee stains on his shirt collar, listened as I calmly explained the situation. Joint accounts were frozen. New personal accounts were opened under my name alone. I transferred every remaining dollar I could legally claim out of reach. Every signature, every PIN change, every authorization request done. If Melissa thought she was going to bleed me dry while I stood around feeling sorry for myself, she had miscalculated. Next was the house. Technically, it was still jointly owned, but she hadn't filed anything yet to claim it exclusively. That gave me time. With a few calls and a favor from a buddy in real estate, I filed a motion with the court to prevent the property from being sold or transferred until the divorce settlement was finalized. It wasn't a guarantee, but it slowed her down and bought me the one thing I needed most: time. Third came the paperwork most people don't think about until it's too late. Insurance policies, retirement accounts, emergency contacts. Every place where her name had been listed next to mine, scrubbed clean. Not out of bitterness. Out of survival. Because when someone shows you they're willing to destroy everything you built together without a second thought, you stop giving them access to the tools that could finish the job. By noon, I was sitting in a different bank lobby, staring at a screensaver cycling through tropical vacation ads, feeling more exhausted than I had after any 10-hour construction shift. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something else too, a small flicker of control. A sense that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't powerless after all. Melissa might have taken the first swing, but she wasn't going to land the knockout punch. Not if I had anything to say about it. Before I left the bank, I opened the Notes app on my phone again and added to the rebuild list. Step 1, protect yourself. Step 2, reclaim your future. Step 3, build a life so good they'd wish they had stayed. I didn't know it yet, but those quiet steps in that stale motel morning were the first bricks laid on the foundation of a life Melissa would one day regret losing. A life that wouldn't be built on anger or revenge, but on something much stronger: resilience. The kind of strength you don't brag about, the kind you don't have to show off, the kind you just live every single day, until the people who doubted you can't help but see it written all over your smile. And I wasn't smiling yet, but I would be soon. A few days later, after the initial shock had worn off and the legal protections were in place, I started to wonder about the things I didn't know, the parts of the story Melissa hadn't included in her neatly typed betrayal. It wasn't enough for me to move on blindly. I needed to understand what had really happened. I needed to see how deep the roots of her deception went. So I did what any man who had been blindsided would do. I started digging. It began with the credit card statements. I had always trusted her to handle the day-to-day finances, believing that trust was part of being a good husband. But now, as I combed through months of charges, patterns emerged that I couldn't ignore. Hotel stays in cities where she had no business being. Expensive dinners charged on nights she said she was working late. Jewelry purchases from stores I knew I hadn't stepped foot in. Tiny lies, stacked one on top of another, until they built a mountain high enough to bury a marriage under. The emails were worse. I still had access to our shared cloud account, another detail she had either forgotten or underestimated. Late at night, with only the glow of my laptop screen for company, I read through conversations that shattered whatever illusions I still clung to. Flirtatious messages, plans for weekends together, mentions of selling the house and starting fresh once the divorce was final. She had been building a future with someone else long before she decided to send me that email. Long before she pretended we still had a fighting chance. For a while, the rage burned hot and violent inside me, like a brush fire that threatened to consume everything. It would have been easy to let it. Easy to make a scene, to send hateful texts, to show up at her new life like a storm she didn't see coming. But rage is a poor architect. Tears down far better than it builds. And I wasn't interested in tearing myself apart just to get even. I was interested in winning, in reclaiming the life she thought she could take from me and turning it into something better than she could ever imagine. So I took all the evidence, the bank statements, the emails, the hotel receipts, and handed them over to my lawyer. Not to destroy her, not to humiliate her, but to make sure that when the settlement negotiations started, there would be no question about who had broken their vows. No question about who deserved to walk away with their head held high. In the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. About standing in the wreckage without shame or apology. Knowing exactly who I was and what I had survived. Melissa thought she could dismantle me with lies and half-truths whispered in the shadows. But what she didn't understand was that truth, once found, doesn't just survive betrayal. It rises above it. And so would I. The court date was set 6 weeks after I filed my official response. It wasn't just paperwork anymore. It was a declaration. Melissa had made her move with an email and silence. I was answering with strategy and patience. In those 6 weeks, I prepared like I was heading into a different kind of battlefield. Not with weapons, but with facts. I met with my attorney twice a week, sometimes more. We built the case brick by brick, laying out every late-night transaction, every email thread, every lie she thought would stay hidden. It wasn't about proving I was perfect. I wasn't. It was about showing that I hadn't abandoned our marriage. That the person sitting across the table had been playing a different game long before the first papers were signed. Melissa, on the other hand, made mistake after mistake. She underestimated me. She thought I would fold under the pressure, that I would agree to whatever settlement she proposed just to get it over with. She didn't realize I had already shifted my thinking. I wasn't clinging to what we had anymore. I wasn't trying to salvage something broken. I was fighting for my future, for the life that would come after her, and I was willing to be patient to protect it. The negotiations started cold and stiff, just as I expected. Her lawyer, a sharp woman with a rehearsed smile, came in with demands that could have emptied me completely. Spousal support for years, half the house, half my retirement savings, and full ownership of the second car. Melissa sat beside her, avoiding my eyes, her hands folded neatly in her lap like she was at a job interview rather than dismantling the life we had once built together. I said nothing at first, just listened. Let them talk. Let them believe they still held all the cards. Then my lawyer slid our file across the polished oak table. Every receipt, every email, every hidden dollar traced and accounted for. The color drained from Melissa's face before her lawyer even finished flipping through the pages. Silence filled the room, heavy and sharp. Not the silence of control Melissa had wielded so easily with her email, but the silence of someone realizing they had just walked into a trap they couldn't escape. When we spoke calmly. No raised voices. No threats, just facts laid bare, undeniable and damning. By the end of the session, the demands shifted. Suddenly, Melissa wasn't asking for spousal support anymore. Suddenly, the car didn't seem so important. Suddenly, she just wanted out quickly and quietly, before the full extent of her choices became part of the court record. We settled later that week. I kept the house. I kept my retirement. I agreed to a modest, one-time payout to close the door without dragging it into an ugly public trial. Not because I had to, because I chose to. Because sometimes the greatest victory isn't in making someone else suffer. It's in walking away clean, carrying only what matters and leaving the rest behind. As I signed the final papers, sitting across from the woman who had once promised forever and delivered nothing but an empty inbox and broken promises, I felt nothing. No hate. No sorrow, no triumph, just peace. Quiet, steady peace. Melissa looked at me once, maybe expecting anger or sadness, maybe expecting a fight, But there was nothing left to fight for. She had already lost the moment she chose betrayal over honesty. And I had already won the moment I chose to rebuild rather than destroy. Some wars aren't fought with fists or fury. Some wars are won in silence. And this one was mine. The morning after the final signatures were filed, I woke up feeling different. Not lighter exactly, more like unburdened. Like I had been carrying a weight for so long that I forgot what it felt like to stand without it pressing into my spine. The motel room walls felt less claustrophobic. The cheap coffee tasted less bitter. Even the air outside, heavy with heat and dust, smelled cleaner somehow. I wasn't free from the memories. Those would take longer to fade. But for the first time in months, maybe years, I was breathing free air. I checked out of the motel and drove across town to the small house I now officially owned outright. It was nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, a sagging front porch, a backyard filled with weeds and the echoes of a life that had moved on without me. But it was mine. Every nail, every crooked floorboard, every patch of peeling paint. Mine. And that mattered more than anything Melissa had tried to take away. I spent the first afternoon walking through the empty rooms, running my fingers along the walls we had once painted together, feeling the ghosts stir and settle around me. There were memories everywhere. Good ones, bad ones, the kind you don't realize are becoming permanent until they're already carved into the woodwork. But I wasn't afraid of them anymore. They didn't have the power to break me. Not now. I opened all the windows, let the sunlight flood in, stripped the bed down to bare mattress, emptied the closets of everything she had left behind. Old perfume bottles, scarves she would never come back for, shoes abandoned like broken promises. I packed it all into black trash bags without ceremony and stacked them by the door. Not out of anger, out of necessity. You can't rebuild a house until you clear out the wreckage. That night, I sat on the back steps with a beer in my hand and Scout, a mutt I'd adopted from the shelter earlier that week, curled up at my feet. The stars stretched wide above me, endless and cold and perfect. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a man on the edge of collapse. I felt like a man standing at the starting line of something new. I didn't know exactly what that new life would look like yet. There were still too many questions, too many empty spaces where old plans used to be. But for once, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I wasn't haunted by what could have been. I was curious. Hopeful, even. Melissa had tried to erase me with a PDF file and a lawyer's letterhead. But here I was still standing. Still breathing. Still ready to build a life that wasn't defined by the people who walked away but by the man who stayed and chose to begin again. And that, I realized, was the real victory. Not in winning the divorce. Not in keeping the house. But in keeping myself whole, steady, and unbreakable. The first few weeks after the dust settled were quiet, almost unsettlingly so. No calls from lawyers. No late-night emails filled with accusations or demands. Just the steady rhythm of days stretching out in front of me, clean and unfinished, like blank pages waiting to be filled. At first, I didn't know what to do with all that space. I had spent so long reacting to Melissa, to the divorce, to the endless fires she lit in our life, that standing still felt strange, almost wrong. But slowly, I started to move forward, one small step at a time. I went back to work full-time, throwing myself into projects with a focus I hadn't felt in years. The long hours didn't bother me anymore. The noise, the heat, the endless demands, they were comforting in a way, solid and honest, unlike the lies I had been living with. I started saving aggressively, pouring every extra dollar into a future I hadn't yet fully imagined but knew would be mine alone this time. Every paycheck wasn't just money in the bank. It was another brick laid in the foundation of the life I was building, piece by stubborn piece. Outside of work, I kept it simple. I fixed the creaking floorboards in the living room. I repainted the kitchen a bright, clean white, scrubbing away the memories embedded in those faded, yellowed walls. I built a fence around the backyard, not to keep anything out, but to define the space that was mine, solid, certain, unquestionable. Scout followed me around like a shadow, her tail wagging, her presence a steady reminder that loyalty wasn't a myth, that some bonds, once formed, held strong without conditions. I didn't date. Not yet. Not because I was afraid, but because I was still healing, still learning who I was when I wasn't part of someone else's plan. I needed to know I could be whole on my own before I let anyone else close again. It wasn't loneliness. It was rebuilding. And rebuilding, I realized, wasn't about rushing. It was about patience, about honoring the process, about trusting that the person emerging from the rubble was worth the time it took. Every day, the past felt a little further away. Melissa's betrayal, once a fresh wound, became a scar, visible, sure, but no longer painful to touch. I stopped wondering where she was, who she was with, what life she had built on the ashes she left behind. I didn't need to know. Her story wasn't mine anymore. And in the quiet moments, sitting on the back porch with Scout at my side and the sky stretching wide and endless above me, I realized something important. Winning wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving her wrong or making her regret what she had done. Winning was waking up every morning knowing that I had survived the worst day of my life and turned it into the foundation for the best ones still to come. And day by day, brick by brick, that's exactly what I was doing. It was on a Sunday morning, 6 months after the divorce was finalized, that I finally understood what freedom really felt like. I woke up early, not because I had to, not because anyone needed anything from me, but because I wanted to. The house was filled with the golden light of early autumn, the kind of light that makes even the dust motes dancing in the air look beautiful. Scout stretched and yawned at the foot of the bed, thumping her tail against the wood floor with lazy contentment. There was no tension clinging to the walls anymore, no unspoken resentment lurking behind morning coffee. Just quiet. Just peace. I brewed a pot of strong coffee and stepped out onto the back porch, wrapping a worn sweatshirt around myself against the chill. The air smelled like wood smoke and dry leaves, clean and sharp. I sipped my coffee slowly, watching the world wake up around me, birds flitting from tree to tree, the wind bending the tall grass along the fence line, the faint sound of a neighbor's dog barking in the distance. There was no one to impress. No one to explain myself to. No one asking for more than I could give. And somehow that didn't feel lonely. It felt right. It felt earned. Later that day, I grabbed my toolbox and started building a workbench in the garage, a solid one, made with thick planks and careful measurements. It wasn't about the bench itself. It was about the act of creating something with my own hands, something real, something that would last. Every screw tightened, every board leveled, every notch sanded smooth was a small act of defiance against the person I used to be, the man who stayed silent when the foundation cracked, who trusted too long, who loved too blindly. That evening, as the sun dipped low and Scout nosed my hand for a walk, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. Not chasing the past. Not hiding from it either. Just moving forward, step by step, into a life that was mine and mine alone. Melissa was a chapter, a messy, painful, necessary chapter, but she wasn't the whole story. She never was. She had been a part of my journey, but not the destination. And as I clipped Scout's leash onto her collar and set off down the dirt path behind the house, I smiled for the first time in a long time. A real smile. A smile born not from forgetting what happened, but from understanding that none of it defined me. Victory isn't loud. It isn't flashy. Sometimes it's just a man walking his dog down a quiet trail at sunset with nothing left to prove to anyone. And sometimes that's more than enough. If you've ever had to rebuild after losing something you thought would last forever. If you've ever found strength you didn't know you had until the world gave you no other choice. I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below. Your journey might be the one thing someone else needs to hear today. And if these stories of resilience and quiet victories resonate with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because this isn't the last story we're telling. It's just the beginning. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, the next chapter is always yours to write.